Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Todd Booker, who is Vice President, Fleet and Carrier Management at MercuryGate. And today we're going to talk about the power of one, the benefits of taking an integrated approach to fleet and carrier and freight management. Now, the transportation market is, more dynamic and complex than ever. And that's leading a lot of companies to look for smarter and more efficient ways to manage the transportation operations. And this includes breaking down the silos that have historically existed between their private fleet and their common carrier operations. So how do you do this? What are some of the challenges? What's the value proposition? Well, those are some of the questions that we're going to explore in today's episode. And it's great to have Todd back on the program, who is kind of on the front lines of this. They're at MercuryGate, not only from a technology side, but obviously working with, shippers and carriers, throughout his time there. So, Todd, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks a lot. It's great to be back on.
So Todd, let's start, with a topic that seems to be playing a bigger and bigger role in transportation these days. And, I know I just came back from the MercuryGate, conference just a couple of weeks ago, and I know this was a topic of conversation there as well. And that is regulations, right? So, from your perspective, which regulations are, quote unquote, top of mind, for shippers and carriers today?
Sure. So, of course, the ELDs and hours of service stuff is the top of the list right now. With the mandate coming up in December, everybody wants to get integrated with an ELD partner. They want to have that data then put into their workflow so they understand how many hours does the driver have left for today, what can I plan them for tomorrow and later in the week. So that's probably the biggest one, is the ELD. Something that comes up a lot with our customers right now is the FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act. That is a big deal, and I think it's a little tougher one because it's not as simple as just a certification for something like a hazmat, because there can be different responsibilities with the shipper and the carrier at every different relationship. So that's a pretty complex one we're working with a lot. For sure, we hear a lot about the EPA stuff, phase 2, the greenhouse gas emissions. I know that one's getting reviewed again now. They've opened it back up, and they're going to take a look, which I think is good because there's a lot to that regulation. It's like 700 plus pages. It's so big. If I was on the carrier side, so I don't know how I would deal with that one. And probably the last one would be the CSA. What's going to happen? What's the plan as they move forward with that? Is it going to change a lot? Is it going to change at all? There's a lot of questions about that from our customers.
Yeah, no, I hear the same thing, and certainly ELDs is in the front burner, I think, for a lot of carriers today, just because the clock is ticking. I mean, this was a topic that we wrote about and talked about in Talking Logistics last year, and it was hey, you've got more than a year to kind of prepare, and many carriers were already kind of compliant, but there were many more that still weren't, and were kind of waiting for some of the legal action that was taking place to work itself out to see what would happen there. But now it's basically on the horizon here. Kind of build upon, on the topic of regulations. I mean, according to a report, by the American Transportation Research Institute, you talk about all these different regulations. I mean, the cumulative effect of all these regulations is really kind of what's a top concern for carriers, right? It's kind of when you all put all these things together. I mean, what does that mean in practical terms, in terms of the day-to-day things that carriers do?
Well, the first thing it means to me is more cost. It's always additional cost for everything. So, take ELDs, for example. I have to, of course, buy the devices and then, put them in the trucks. And then there's a monthly subscription to use the device. I have to train all these drivers, train all my staff to use them. Depending on your software platform, pay to have that integrated into the platform. When it's like the EPA stuff, is it new trailers with different kinds of sides on them, different compliant engines that have to be put in? The service and maintenance that goes along with that is complex, and there's new requirements there. So that's, more additional cost, additional staff kind of thing. And then what does that do to your productivity, right? Is your productivity lost while your drivers are working on these new ELD devices? Not to say that people aren't running legally right now. I'm not looking at it from that perspective, but now it's just another thing that somebody has to do. So, does that impact you at all? So really, there's some benefits with some data you can get from it, but really to me, it's just a lot more cost for the carriers to absorb right now.
Right, right. And when you mentioned that, I forget which was the one you mentioned that was, I think it's the EPA one. You're talking about 700 pages worth, right? It's kind of going through all that and understanding, what the requirements are, and then how to translate that into your operations. In and of itself, that adds some, added complexity, added work, to what carriers have to do. And I think one of the other dimensions beyond cost is also risk. Right. And I think that's, one of the things I always like to say is that, supply chain management is risky business. Right. So when it comes to transportation and regulations, I mean, what kind of risks are involved here?
Well, there's risk all over the place, right? Every point of the process, just, with logistics to begin with. But, for sure with these new compliance regulations, you want to make sure your carriers that you're using are always in compliance, and not just, are they legal to operate, but all the compliance factors, and are they above average in meeting your own personal needs? For your fleet or your drivers, do they have all the qualifications they need? Is everything up to date? Are they ready to run? And with the EPA stuff on the equipment, can you even take equipment into a certain state, or can you use this equipment anymore moving forward? I mean, there's so many regulations. If you don't comply with those, I think that elevates your risk right away.
Right, and I think that has a ripple effect, to shippers as well, right? Because there's the cost component, obviously, that's going to come into play with regards to how that gets translated into rates and things like that moving forward. But obviously, shippers also want to work with carriers that are in compliance with all the respective regulations that affect them as well. Whether it's if they're a food shipper, right? Want to make sure that the carriers are part of keeping their part of compliance with food safety regulations, and certainly with hours of service and things like that. A lot of shippers want to make sure that they're working with responsible partners, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So let's talk now, about the topic at hand, about the complexity of, involved in managing, operations that involve both private fleet and, common carriers, right? Because I think what I hear from a lot of shippers is, and 3PLs, quite frankly, is, in light of everything that's going on in the transportation industry, we got to take a smarter, more integrated approach in terms of how we manage our operations. So what are some of the factors and constraints that companies need to take into consideration, if they're looking to bring those two historically siloed operations together?
Right. So you need to make sure, if you're using third-party carriers, that they're always compliant and they're always monitored. One of the things we fall into false security when we send out a carrier packet and get the details and get the insurance certificate and put it in a file cabinet. And they're good right now. That doesn't mean they're going to be good tomorrow or next week or next month. So really a strong carrier management tool that continues to monitor them to make sure they're always in compliance is key to me. Same kind of thing for your private fleet, your drivers and equipment. There's a lot of things that go on with drivers and your fleet equipment that need to be, managed. When is the guy's license or physical going to expire? Did he have, certain kinds of training? All those kind of things, his hazmat permit. All that has to be monitored. You need to know that these guys are always ready to earn any moment. And on the equipment side, when was the last service and inspections, and make all the things that go into making sure your equipment is ready to go are also just key items. And having all that available in one system, to me, is the biggest part, because it's tough to run to. If I have to go down to some file cabinet in the safety office to find detail about my driver, or I have to go out to the shop or call somebody in the shop to find out about a piece of equipment. It's really to the point now that the system needs to know everything all the time to get the job done correctly.
Right. So, I mean, you brought up a number of different dimensions there, right? There's making sure the compliance piece that we talked about. I think that's becoming even more, challenging, because I think now, what we're beginning to see is more and more shippers having to go to the spot market, right? Because their contracted carriers aren't able to meet the demand, or shippers just looking for new sources of capacity out there and bringing onboarding new carriers onto their routing guides and their networks. So I think that's going to be a continuous process there in terms of ensuring that type of compliance. But then you brought up the other aspects of it, in terms of, drivers, right? And there's so much information that needs to be tracked there, managed there, in terms of everything from their qualifications to their vacation days or the domiciles and things like that go into the planning and execution side of it, and then obviously the equipment, right? And so a lot of different factors, a lot of different constraints that I think, to your point, really have to, in the ideal sense, have to be viewed at and taken into consideration in an integrated fashion. But that's not the way a lot of companies manage it today, right? I mean, how are companies doing this today?
Right, you're exactly right. Most companies don't have a system that can do it all at once. So the carrier's got multiple systems that do it, or maybe they're doing some of their equipment things in spreadsheets, and they have another system for managing freight, and they have some other kind of system that does their driver work. And really, it's all disjointed, and it's a horrible user experience, which then ends up getting you in trouble when you do something wrong because you just didn't know. Where MercuryGate customers who are using Mercury Fleet are very fortunate because we offer that integrated approach. So when you're working in the TMS executing the freight movements, if your drivers are qualified, the carriers are ready to go, that the fleet equipment is all up to standards, and if you have any questions, it's all in the same system. So it's a click away to find out any deeper detail on any of those items. And then just knowing that there's monitoring and then there's dynamic rules in the background that are making sure that all that stuff is always compliant. I think that's the big difference that we're bringing to the marketplace.
Right. I mean, I think certainly what looking at the transportation management systems market as a whole has been one of the key trends over the past few years, right? It's been, historically it's been, a lot of the solutions kind of mirrored the way companies manage their operations, right? So it was a lot of disparate different systems that either a user had to go to multiple systems to try to, make a decision or to plan effectively for the day, or you try to integrate them in some, some way. But what we've been seeing in the marketplace is kind of this coming together of the different aspects of transportation management, not only common carrier and private fleet, but we've seen parcel come into there as well, and other aspects, again, that historically were, fragmented, solutions. But what have been some of the hurdles, that companies are facing in kind of taking this integrated, approach? Obviously, the technology was one of them, right? Not having, a technology platform that was capable of doing this. But any other kind of historical challenges to doing this?
Well, I think for non-MercuryGate customers, there's a lot of them. The solution has been for those companies is, through acquisition, they're buying different companies and trying to put software together. So maybe I had a great truckload product and I tried to buy an LTL product, and then I tried to slide parcel in there somehow. And, maybe I acquired another company that did fleet management, bolt them together. And it's still a disjointed feeling. None of it's really totally integrated. You have different code bases, different database structures, and the data, it's just not all there. Fortunately for us here at MercuryGate, that single platform, cloud-based enterprise TMS has always been what we've done since the beginning. So everything is always integrated, depending on or including different modes. So if I'm doing truckload or LTL or parcel, it's all the same application. If I need to see information about my fleet or my drivers or my carriers, it's all right there at your fingertips. You decide to optimize or not optimize your loads, the Mojo's right there in the application to do the optimization for you. So, for us, it's a lot less hurdles as we're going forward, because that's our mindset since the beginning.
Right. Yeah. So I think you hit on some of the historical ones that I hear a lot, from companies, obviously trying to integrate, different applications to kind of get that visibility, right? Data quality in terms of making sure you have timely and accurate information in those systems to make sure that you're working off the, accurate information. Otherwise you get into the whole garbage in, garbage out, situation. So I think, it's been a kind of a juggling act for a lot of companies to really do this effectively. But I think in light of everything that's happening in the transportation industry today, I think the tide is starting to turn, because I think companies are recognizing that they need to, approach this in a smarter, more effective way. To that point, I mean, what's the value proposition at the end of the day of taking an integrated approach? I mean, what are some of the benefits?
Well, first, it's all about that whole integrated experience. It's very intuitive. It's just connected, efficient. It helps you do your job better, and it just feels right when you're doing it, right? I don't have to jump around from system to system or doing any of that kind of stuff. If it's truly integrated correctly, it flows naturally with what your workflow is. Whether it's like I mentioned before, you're working on freight execution, and you're building, you're optimizing, you're building your source capacity. If you're trying to procure new carriers to move your freight, those kind of things, all that stuff is all integrated, and it just makes the whole experience better for your employee and makes them more productive in the end. That's the direction we like to keep it going. The more your employees feel good about the system and feel very efficient, the more work they're going to get done and the more profits they're going to earn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a key point in terms of productivity of that frontline employee who has to do both the the planning and manage the planning and the execution of the daily activities. Certainly having to bounce around different solutions and different screens and one of the things you always heard historically from a lot of users of TMS, and one of the things that they hated the most about solutions was the fact they had to open 3 different windows or click 15 different places to kind of get their job done. So that's been one of the key trends that I've seen in the industry, is trying to kind of bring all that relevant information to the forefront and be able to execute, plan and optimize and execute in an as efficient manner as possible. And I think another added benefit is the fact that I think there's less margin for error today, right? I mean, when you look at things like like Walmart and on time in full, with so much complexity involved with keeping track of what's happening on the driver's side, keeping track of what's happening with regulations, keeping track of what's happening on the equipment side, any one of those things can create an exception that can cause that shipment to fail or be delayed. And I think that the more fragmented your approach is to managing your operations, the more margin, the more room for error you have, and thus the higher the probability that you're going to drop the ball somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. You really need to know everything. You need to know it all at once, all the time, kind of thing. And that's what the full integrated approach will do. Whatever you need to know, it's just right there to see.
So, Todd, we're kind of running short on time here. So, just as a way to wrap up, I mean, what do you see as the road ahead, looking like for shippers and carriers in this area? I mean, what action should they take today to kind of make sure that they're going to be able to succeed moving forward?
Sure. Well, if you're out in the market looking for a new transportation management solution, I would recommend they look for that integrated approach, right? You don't want to, even though a company might say, I have all these features, if you have to leave one part of the product and go to another part, or open up different windows and do that kind of thing, that's really not integrated for you. Make sure you get MercuryGate a look, because that is what we do. I mean, the screens that we have, the newer technology that we use, it's all fully integrated. I think you'd be very, very happy with what you would see there. For us, the future looks great. We have a very robust roadmap for Mercury Fleet and moving forward, and we're excited to keep bringing new features every release. So on our side, the future is looking great.
Great. Well, I think I think what I hear from a lot of shippers and carriers is that the market continues, like I said in my opening remarks, continues to be more dynamic and more complex. And I think, based on what I heard at your conference recently and CSCMP and other conferences, a lot of folks are looking at the future as kind of another perfect storm emerging with regards to tightening capacity and rising rates. And, again, looking for ways to, weather that storm as effectively as possible, I think is what I see from shippers and carriers. And obviously technology like TMS is going to play a critical role doing that. So Todd, again, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think you provided some good insights and advice in terms of where we are today and what the road ahead looks like. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you are watching this episode on demand, either at the MercuryGate website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Todd, you can post it there. I'm sure that he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.